The CEO misjudged her as a teacher until one simple move changed everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories like this one. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us go back to our main character. The soft hum of conversation filled the grand ballroom, mixing with the gentle clink of glasses and silverware. Warm, golden light spilled across white tablecloths, polished floors, and towering windows that overlooked the city skyline. Everything about the place whispered money, power, and influence. But she did not belong here. At least, that was what everyone assumed. She stood near the entrance, fingers lightly gripping the strap of her worn leather bag, taking a quiet breath before stepping forward. Her dress was simple, navy blue, modest. The kind of dress a public school teacher would wear on a long workday, not to a high-profile charity gala attended by billionaires and corporate leaders. Across the room, Daniel Whitmore, the CEO of one of the fastest-growing technology firms in the country, glanced up from his conversation. His suit was perfectly tailored, his posture relaxed but commanding. He had spent his life reading rooms, assessing people in seconds, and in that brief glance, he made a decision. She was just a teacher, probably invited as a +1, someone who would quietly sip her drink and leave early. Daniel looked away. He had no idea that this single, careless judgment was about to unravel everything he thought he understood. She moved through the crowd, carefully, scanning name cards, checking table numbers. Her heart beat a little faster with each step. She was not nervous because of the people. She was nervous because she almost had not come. An hour earlier, she had nearly turned around in the parking garage, telling herself she did not belong in a room like this. That her students needed her more than any gala ever could. But something inside her had whispered, "Just this once. Do not hide." She reached the refreshment table and poured herself a glass of water instead of champagne. Her hands were steady, but her thoughts were not. She rehearsed what she might say if someone asked why she was there. "I am just a teacher," she would say politely. That was always enough to end conversations quickly. Behind her, Daniel laughed at a joke made by one of the board members. Yet, for reasons he could not explain, his attention drifted back to her. There was nothing flashy about her. No diamonds. No designer bag. But there was a quiet confidence in the way she stood, like someone used to being overlooked but never diminished by it. Still, he dismissed the thought. A few minutes later, their paths crossed near the corridor leading to the terrace. "Excuse me," Daniel said automatically when they nearly bumped into each other. "Oh, I am sorry," she replied, stepping aside. Her voice was calm, clear, not apologetic in the way he expected. They shared a brief smile, polite and distant. Nothing more, or so he thought. As she walked away, she reached up, slipped the hair tie from her wrist, and slowly let her hair fall down her back. The simple motion was unintentional, almost absent-minded. A habit, a small move she had done 1,000 times after long days in the classroom. But the moment froze Daniel in place. The room did not actually fall silent. Conversations continued. Glasses clinked. Music played softly in the background. And yet, in his mind, everything stopped. Something about that single, ordinary gesture shifted the air around her. And for the first time that night, Daniel Whitmore realized he might have made a mistake he could not take back. She had not planned to stay long. That had been her promise to herself when she accepted the invitation. 1 hour, maybe less. Smile politely. Leave before anyone asked questions she did not want to answer. Rooms like this had a way of reminding her of everything she was not. Her name was Emily Carter, and for 12 years, she had been a public school teacher on the south side of the city. Every weekday morning, she stood in front of 30 restless students in a classroom with flickering lights and outdated textbooks. She bought supplies with her own money. She stayed late to tutor children, whose parents worked double shifts. She learned how to spot hunger behind forced smiles, how to hear fear hidden inside jokes. Teaching was not just her job, it was her life. And it was slowly draining her. The invitation to the gala had come through the school district, only a week earlier. A last-minute cancellation. They needed a representative to attend a charity event focused on education reform, someone who could speak if needed. Someone who understood what the numbers on grant proposals actually meant in real classrooms. She had almost said no. Her car needed repairs. Her rent was due in 10 days. Her savings account barely existed. A new winter coat for one of her students still sat folded on her kitchen table, waiting to be delivered. Going to a gala felt indulgent. Almost wrong. But then she thought about her students. About Marcus, who read at a third-grade level but pretended he did not care. About Sophia, who stayed after school every day because home was louder than the hallway. About the quiet promise she made to herself every year that she would not give up on them, even when the system made it easy to give up on her. So she said yes. Standing in the ballroom now, Emily reminded herself why she had come. Not for attention. Not for approval. She was here because decisions were made in rooms like this. Decisions that shaped budgets, programs, and futures. And for once, someone needed to speak for the people who were never invited. Across the room, Daniel Whitmore accepted another handshake, another compliment. He was used to this world. He belonged to it in ways Emily never would. To him, this event was an obligation, a strategic appearance, another line item in a carefully curated public image. Emily watched him briefly, then looked away. Men like him funded schools without ever stepping inside one. They talked about children using charts and projections. They spoke about efficiency, not impact. She had learned not to expect understanding from people who had never held a crying child after the final bell rang. She took a slow sip of water, grounding herself. Her speech notes rested inside her bag, folded and refolded so many times the edges were soft. She did not know if she would be called up. No one had told her. But she prepared anyway. She always did. Because if she was given the chance to speak, even for 1 minute, she intended to make it count. Emily straightened her shoulders and exhaled. She did not know it yet. But the very thing she had come here to protect was about to collide with the man who had already decided she did not matter. And that collision would change both of them forever. Emily moved toward an empty table near the edge of the ballroom and finally allowed herself to sit down. The chair felt too elegant, too fragile, as if it belonged to someone else. She placed her bag carefully at her feet, resting one hand on it as though it anchored her to something familiar. Inside that bag was her lesson planner. It was not a notebook anyone here would admire. The cover was faded. The corners were bent. Sticky notes peeked out from every side, marked with reminders written in blue and red ink. Reading goals, parent meetings, notes about students who needed extra attention. It was the one item she never left behind, even tonight. She reached down, opened the bag slightly, and checked to make sure it was still there. It was. Emily let out a quiet breath. This planner was where her real world lived. Not in donor lists or polished speeches, but in scribbled margins and hurried notes written between classes. It held the names of children who trusted her, children whose futures depended on decisions made by people who would never know their faces. Across the room, Daniel Whitmore shifted his stance as another conversation ended. His assistant leaned in briefly, whispering something about the program schedule. Daniel nodded without really listening. His attention drifted again, uninvited, back toward the woman in the navy dress. The teacher. He had noticed her bag earlier. It did not match the room. Not leather. Not designer. Just practical. Worn. The kind of bag someone carried every day. Not just for appearances. For a moment, he wondered what was inside it. Then he dismissed the thought. Emily stood again when a server passed, politely declining food. She did not want to spill anything on her dress. She did not want to feel more out of place than she already did. Instead, she stepped closer to the stage area, where a small podium waited beneath soft lights. She watched as names were tested on the microphone. Donors. Board members. Sponsors. Her name was not on the list. That was expected. Still, she found herself touching the hair tie around her wrist, sliding it up and down her skin. It was a nervous habit, one she had picked up years ago during her first year of teaching. Back then, she tied her hair up to look older, more authoritative, to be taken seriously by students who tested her limits daily. Eventually, she stopped doing it for them. Now, she did it for herself. Daniel glanced toward the stage as well, his expression neutral. This part of the evening mattered to him. Visibility mattered. He would be called up later, he knew that. His company logo already appeared on the large screen behind the podium. He did not notice Emily studying the same space with a very different weight in her chest. To her, that podium was not about recognition. It was about possibility. If she were given the chance to speak, even briefly, she would not talk about percentages or projections. She would talk about classrooms with broken heaters, about students sharing textbooks, about how one small investment could change the direction of a child's life. She did not know if that chance would come, but she stayed ready. Emily slipped the hair tie from her wrist and held it loosely in her fingers, unaware that this simple, absent-minded gesture would soon become the moment everything shifted. A seed had been planted. Neither of them understood it yet. The music softened as the program shifted into an informal mingling period. Guests moved closer together, voices lowering, laughter becoming more deliberate. This was the part of the night Daniel Whitmore handled best. No speeches, no spotlights, just controlled conversations that led exactly where he wanted them to go. He excused himself from a cluster of investors and stepped toward the terrace doors, loosening his shoulders slightly. The city lights outside were sharp and distant, a familiar comfort. That was when he saw her again. Emily stood near the edge of the room, reading a small printed program, as if it mattered more than anything else around her. Her posture was straight, composed. She was not scanning the room for attention. She was waiting. Daniel hesitated, then walked over. "Is this your first time at one of these events?" he asked, his tone polite, casual, already framed by assumption. Emily looked up, surprised, then nodded once. "Yes, it is." Emily looked up. "I thought so," he said with a faint smile. "They can be overwhelming if you are not used to them." She returned the smile, smaller, measured. "I imagine they become easier with practice." ISM. Daniel glanced at her bag, then back at her face. "So, what do you teach?" There it was. The label. The quiet box he had already placed her in. "English and history," Emily replied. "Middle school." Daniel nodded, as if confirming a theory. "That must be rewarding." "Difficult, but meaningful." "It is," she said. Then, after a brief pause, "It is also complicated." He did not expect that. "Complicated how?" he asked. Emily considered him for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Because caring about something does not always mean you are given the tools to protect it." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "That is true in many industries." She met his gaze. "Some more than others." The response caught him off guard. There was no accusation in her voice, no edge. Just clarity. "I work in technology," Daniel said, out of habit. "We partner with several education initiatives." "I know," Emily replied calmly. That surprised him again. "You do?" he asked. "Yes. Your company donated tablets to 3 schools in my district last year." Daniel smiled, pleased. "Then you have seen the impact." "I have seen the intention," she said. "And I appreciate it. Due of it has not avined." The smile lingered on his face, but something behind it shifted. Emily continued, her voice steady. "The tablets arrived without training, without updated software, without support. After 6 months, half of them were unusable." Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. She was not criticizing. She was explaining. The way she explained concepts to students who needed truth without blame. "I am not saying this to offend you," Emily added gently. "Only to say that the distance between funding and reality can be wider than people realize." For the first time that evening, Daniel did not know what to say. He had expected gratitude, polite enthusiasm, a safe conversation he could exit at will. Instead, he found himself standing in front of someone who was not impressed, not intimidated, and not trying to prove anything. "That is valuable feedback," he said finally. Emily nodded. "I hope so." A moment of silence settled between them. Not awkward, just unresolved. The program director's voice echoed faintly through the speakers, announcing the next segment would begin shortly. Guests began drifting back toward the stage. Daniel hesitated. "Well," he said, gesturing toward the crowd, "I suppose we should return." "Yes," Emily agreed. She turned first, walking away without looking back. Daniel watched her go, a strange tension settling in his chest. He told himself it was nothing. Just a conversation. Just a teacher with strong opinions. But as she disappeared into the crowd, he realized something unsettled him deeply. For the first time that night, he was no longer certain he had understood who she was. And that uncertainty followed him as the lights dimmed and the room prepared for the next name to be called. The lights dimmed slightly as guests settled into their seats. A soft hush spread across the ballroom, not silence, but anticipation. Emily took a seat near the aisle, her bag still at her feet, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She reminded herself to breathe. This was the part she understood least. The waiting. On stage, the program moved through a series of brief acknowledgments. Donors were thanked. Foundations were praised. Applause came easily, predictably. Emily clapped when appropriate, her expression respectful, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about the conversation she had just had. Daniel Whitmore had not been rude. He had not been cruel. But he had spoken to her the way people always did, once they heard the word teacher. Kindly, distantly, as if her world existed in a separate, smaller lane. She was used to it. What lingered was not frustration, but a familiar sadness. The kind that came from knowing how much truth never made it into rooms like this. A few rows ahead, Daniel sat with his back straight, eyes forward. He listened as the next speaker approached the podium, but Emily's words replayed quietly in his mind. The distance between funding and reality can be wider than people realize. He had heard complaints before. Emails filtered by assistants, reports softened by consultants. But her words had not sounded like complaints. They had sounded like responsibility. Against his will, his attention drifted again toward her. Emily shifted in her seat, then reached down and pulled her planner from her bag. She opened it just enough to check a page she already knew by heart. Tomorrow's lesson. A discussion prompt circled twice in red ink. She closed the planner and rested her palm on it, grounding herself. This was who she was. Not the dress. Not the invitation. Not the assumptions. This. The speaker on stage spoke about innovation, about opportunity, about scalable solutions. The words were polished, impressive. Applause followed. Emily felt her jaw tighten slightly. Daniel noticed. He watched her lean forward just a fraction, her brow creasing, not in anger but in thought. She was listening critically, actively, the way someone listened when the subject mattered to them personally. It struck him then how different her attention was from everyone else's. Most people here listen to respond, to network, to align themselves with influence. Emily listened as if the outcome might affect real lives, because it did. The speaker concluded, and the program director stepped back onto the stage. There was a pause as she adjusted the microphone. Daniel glanced at the printed agenda in his lap. Next segment. A short recognition. A representative from the local school district. He looked up. Emily had straightened in her seat, her shoulders squared. Her fingers tightened briefly around the edge of her planner. Daniel felt a subtle shift in the room, like the air before a storm. The program director smiled warmly. Tonight, we would also like to recognize someone who works on the front lines of education. Someone who sees the impact of our decisions every single day. Emily's heart began to pound, slow but heavy. She had not been told this would happen. Daniel's gaze fixed on her, his mind racing. The director continued, "Please welcome Emily Carter, a public school teacher who has dedicated over a decade to serving students in under-resourced communities." I am. A ripple of polite applause moved through the room. Emily stood. She smoothed the front of her dress once, instinctively, then stepped into the aisle. Her movements were calm, practiced, not because she belonged here, but because she had learned long ago how to stand steady when everything felt uncertain. Daniel watched her walk toward the stage, his earlier assumptions cracking one by one. She was not nervous. She was ready. And as she reached the steps leading up to the podium, Daniel realized that whatever he thought this night was about, he had been wrong. Because this was no longer a story about a teacher in a room full of powerful people. It was about a voice that had been waiting for the right moment to be heard. And that moment had finally arrived. Emily paused at the podium, letting the room settle. The lights above the stage felt warmer than she expected. Not blinding. Not harsh. Just present. She placed her planner gently on the surface in front of her, the familiar weight steadying her hands. For a brief second, she looked out at the sea of faces watching her. Executives, donors, board members, people used to being heard. She reached up, slid the hair tie from her wrist, and slowly let her hair fall free down her shoulders. It was a simple move, almost unconscious, something she had done hundreds of times after long days at school. But the effect was immediate, not because of how she looked, but because of how she stood afterward. Straighter, grounded, certain. Daniel Whitmore felt it before he understood it. A subtle shift in the room. Conversations did not stop, but attention sharpened. People leaned forward. Something about her presence had changed, and he could not look away. Emily adjusted the microphone slightly and began to speak. "My name is Emily Carter," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I am a public school teacher, and every morning, I unlock a classroom that tells my students exactly how much the world expects from them." A murmur rippled softly through the audience. She continued. "Some of my students share textbooks that are older than they are. Some come to school hungry. Some come because school is the only place they feel safe." Daniel's chest tightened. Emily did not rush. She did not perform. She spoke the way she taught, each word chosen with care. "When people talk about education reform," she said, "they talk about numbers, efficiency, scale. But my students are not numbers. They are names. They are faces. They are futures." The room grew quieter. Daniel noticed his own hands had curled into fists on his lap. Emily opened her planner and glanced down, then looked back up. "Last winter, one of my students asked me if it was okay to stop trying. He said he felt tired of hoping." Her voice did not waver. "I told him no. I told him that someone, somewhere, was fighting for him. That even if he could not see it yet, he mattered." She paused. "And tonight, I am asking you to help me make that true." Silence. Not polite silence. Not distracted silence. The kind of silence that comes when people realize they are being spoken to, not spoken at. Daniel felt something inside him give way. This was not a teacher asking for charity. This was a leader asking for responsibility. Emily continued. "We do not need grand gestures. We need commitment. Training that matches donations. Support that lasts longer than a press release. We need people willing to listen before they decide." Her eyes swept the room, then, without intention, met Daniel's. For a fraction of a second, neither of them looked away. He saw no insecurity there. No need for validation. Only conviction. "That is all," Emily said softly. "Thank you for listening." She stepped back from the podium. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the applause began. Not the scattered applause of obligation, but a rising wave that filled the ballroom. People stood. Some clapped slowly, deliberately. Others faster, energized. Daniel found himself on his feet before he realized he had moved. His hands stung as he clapped. The realization hit him with uncomfortable clarity. He had misjudged her. Not just her role. Not just her presence. Her power. As Emily walked off the stage, her hair loose, her planner tucked under her arm, Daniel understood something that unsettled him deeply. The most important voice in the room had belonged to the person he had dismissed first. And there was no undoing that mistake. Only the choice of what to do next. The applause followed Emily as she stepped down from the stage, but she did not let it slow her. She nodded once to the program director, offered a quiet thank you, and continued walking until the noise softened behind her. Her heart was still racing, but her face remained composed. She had said what needed to be said. That was enough. Near the side corridor, she stopped and exhaled, her fingers tightening briefly around the edge of her planner. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what had just happened. The relief, the exhaustion, the vulnerability she had kept carefully contained. Emily. She turned. Daniel Whitmore stood a few steps away, no longer surrounded by advisors or board members. For the first time that night, he looked unsure of his footing. That was extra, he paused, searching for the right word. That was extraordinary. Emily studied him calmly. Thank you. I did not realize, Daniel began, then stopped. He tried again. I owe you an apology. She raised an eyebrow slightly. For what? For underestimating you, he said. For assuming. Emily let a small silence settle between them. You assumed because it was easy, she said. Her voice was not sharp, but it was firm. People usually do. Daniel nodded. You are right. I have spent years being spoken to kindly. Emily continued, and listened to very little. Tonight was not about proving anything. It was about my students. I understand that now, Daniel said. Emily met his gaze. The problem is that understanding after the fact does not change the fact itself. The words landed with more weight than he expected. I would like to help, Daniel said quickly. In a real way. Not just funding. Structure. Support. Emily shook her head gently. This is not a conversation we should have because you feel impressed. Daniel stiffened slightly. That is not why I am here. Then why are you? She asked. He hesitated. Because I realized I was wrong. Why did? Emily considered him. She believed him. That did not mean she trusted him. Being wrong is not the same as being accountable, she said. And I am tired of carrying the burden of educating people who have power. Daniel absorbed that in silence. I am not asking you to prove yourself to me, Emily added. I am asking you to think about how often you decide who matters before they speak. She turned to leave. Emily, Daniel said, his voice lower now. You are right, and I do not expect forgiveness. I only hope for the chance to do better. She stopped, then looked back at him one last time. Doing better starts when no one is watching, she said. Then she walked away. Daniel remained where he was, the noise of the gala swelling around him again. Conversations resumed. Laughter returned. Business continued as usual. But for him, something fundamental had shifted. Across the room, Emily gathered her coat and bag, preparing to leave. The planner rested securely under her arm, just as it always did. She had come here to speak for her students, and she had done that. What happened next was no longer hers to control. As she stepped out into the cool night air, she felt a quiet certainty settle in her chest. She had not been invited into that room to be seen. She had been invited to be heard. And somewhere behind her, Daniel Whitmore stood alone, facing the uncomfortable truth that the most powerful lesson of the night had not come from the stage, but from the judgment he had made too quickly. A lesson that would demand more than applause to answer. Emily did not hear from Daniel Whitmore the next morning, or the next. By the third day, she had returned fully to her routine. Morning duty, lesson plans, parent emails, the familiar rhythm of a classroom that did not pause just because she had spoken in a room full of powerful people. If anything, the gala already felt distant, like a moment that belonged to another version of herself. She stood at the whiteboard, explaining symbolism in a short story, when the intercom crackled to life. Miss Carter, please check your email during lunch. She nodded and continued teaching. At noon, she sat at her desk, unwrapping a sandwich she had made at home. Her laptop chimed. One new message. No subject line that stood out. Just her name. She opened it. It was not from Daniel. It was from the school district. The message was brief, formal, and confusing. It mentioned a new partnership proposal, a request for a meeting, a restructuring of a pilot program that had been denied funding twice before. Emily reread it slowly. Something was different. Across the city, Daniel Whitmore sat alone in a glass-walled conference room. No press, no board members, no assistants taking notes. Just documents spread across the table and a screen filled with spreadsheets that looked very different than they had a week ago. He had canceled 3 meetings that morning. Instead, he had asked his team one question they were not prepared for. What happens after the donation? There had been silence. Then vague answers, then uncomfortable admissions. So he pushed further. He requested reports that had never been requested. He asked for timelines beyond launch dates. He demanded to know how many teachers had been trained, how many devices were still in use, how many programs had quietly failed once the cameras were gone. The answers were not flattering. Daniel did not issue a press release. He did not announce a new initiative. He did something far less visible. He changed the structure. By the end of the week, a new internal fund had been approved. Not for branding, not for expansion, for maintenance, training, long-term support, and he insisted on one condition. Teachers would lead it. Emily learned this slowly, piece by piece. The meeting with the district revealed that her school had been selected as the first site. Not for a showcase, for a trial. One shaped by classroom needs, not corporate assumptions. She listened carefully, her expression guarded. Who is behind this? She asked finally. The district representative hesitated. Mr. Whitmore requested that we speak with you directly. Emily nodded once. I will review the proposal. She did not call Daniel. She waited. A week later, he stood in the hallway outside her classroom, holding no flowers, no apology speech prepared. Just a thin folder and a quiet resolve. Emily saw him through the doorway and stepped outside, closing the door gently behind her. "This is not a press opportunity," she said before he could speak. "I know," Daniel replied. "This does not make you a hero. I know that too." She studied him for a long moment. "Then why are you here?" "Because I listened," he said, "and I realized listening was not enough." He handed her the folder. Inside were plans, budgets, training schedules, names of teachers on advisory panels. Her name among them, not at the top, but in the middle. No spotlight, just responsibility. Emily closed the folder slowly. "You did this without asking me," she said. "Yes," Daniel answered, "because you were clear that this was not about you." Silence settled between them. Finally, Emily spoke. "This does not erase your first judgment." "I know," Daniel said, "but I hope it proves that I learned from it." Emily looked past him, back into her classroom, where students waited. "Then we start there," she said. "Not forgiveness, not romance, just work." And for the first time, Daniel Whitmore understood that the most meaningful commitments were the ones made quietly, when no one was counting the applause. The school year moved forward quietly. There were no headlines, no cameras waiting outside the building, no speeches about transformation, just steady change, measured in small moments that most people would never notice. New training sessions replaced rushed rollouts. Teachers were asked for input before decisions were finalized. Support staff returned months later, not days, to fix what was broken and listen to what still did not work. Emily watched it happen from the inside. She remained in her classroom every morning, greeting students by name, reminding them to put their phones away, reminding them that their voices mattered. The difference now was not dramatic, but it was real. Lessons ran smoother. Students stayed engaged longer. And for the first time in a long while, Emily did not feel like she was fighting alone. Daniel Whitmore kept his distance, not out of avoidance, but out of respect. He attended meetings when invited. He listened more than he spoke. He learned quickly that leadership did not mean being the loudest voice in the room. It meant knowing when to step back. When he did visit the school, he came quietly. No entourage, no announcements. Just a man standing in the back of a classroom, watching a teacher do what she had always done. One afternoon, as students filed out for the day, Emily caught him waiting by the door. "They like you," he said, nodding toward the hallway. "They like consistency," she replied. "People who show up." Daniel smiled faintly. "I am still learning that." They walked together down the corridor, passing bulletin boards filled with student work. Essays, drawings, dreams written in careful handwriting. "You were right," Daniel said after a moment. "I made a judgment before I listened." Emily stopped and turned to him. "We all do. The question is what we do after." He met her gaze. "Thank you for not letting me hide behind applause." Emily considered him, then nodded once. "Thank you for choosing action instead of excuses." Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. The city hummed in the distance, unchanged. "This does not feel like an ending," Daniel said quietly. "It is not," Emily replied. "It is accountability. That tends to last longer." They stood there for a moment, not as a CEO and a teacher, not as symbols or opposites, but as two people who had learned something difficult at the same time. Daniel extended his hand. Not for a deal, not for a promise, just acknowledgement. Emily took it. The biggest mistake he had made that night was judging her before she spoke. The most important lesson he learned was staying long enough to listen when she did. And somewhere between a quiet classroom and a room full of power, both of them discovered the same truth. True leadership is not about status. And real change does not begin with being seen. It begins with being willing to listen, learn, and act, even when no one is watching.